Hey church, and welcome to this week's small group. Now on Sunday, we kind of had that weird sermon that advised us all to invest in assets and limit liabilities. Now we were talking about that as a principle for not just our finances, but for all of life, to invest in assets and limit liabilities. However, today for small group, we're going to talk about it from a financial point of view. And we're going to actually look at some principles that we find in Scripture that will help us to think about that in a different way. So when we start out, define what an asset is and what a liability is, and what are some examples of each? And what is something that most people think is an asset, but it is actually a liability? So let's start out today by reading Genesis chapter 41, verses 29 through 32. What is the problem presented to Pharaoh? And what was at risk by doing nothing about this information? Next, I want you to read the rest of it. Genesis chapter 41, verses 33 through 37. What was the plan Joseph presented to Pharaoh? And the next question is something that we all have read and we just skim over. We don't really look at it, but this is what I want you to focus in on today. Exactly how much of the harvest was planned to save for that 7 years? How much of the harvest was planned to save for those 7 years? Now, whenever we think about the pharaohs in Egypt, we always think of them as these almighty rulers over Egypt. But the truth of the matter is when Joseph came to Pharaoh, he was actually a weak ruler. And it wasn't because of his personality or anything, it was just that the pharaohs were not very strong. Egypt was actually divided into many different districts called nomes with powerful and wealthy leaders over each one of them. So it was kind of like a confederacy. And so the question is, so how did Pharaoh become so powerful? Let's now fast forward the story to the middle of the famine, when the people ran out of money to give Pharaoh to be able to buy their grain. Read Genesis chapter 47, verses 20 through 22. What did saving a fifth of Pharaoh's harvest for 7 years buy in the 7 years of famine? And is saving for a rainy day just for survival or for something more? So when someone says, hey, I want to save for a rainy day, do they mean just to survive the rainy day? Or do they mean for something more than just survival? What I really want you to see is that rainy days are wise people's opportunity to gain wealth. When we are wise with our finances, we can enjoy the good times, but we can also gain in the bad times, okay? When times are bad and everybody's freaking out, the people who have been wise with their finances have the resources to buy assets at a big discount, which is exactly what Pharaoh did. Next, I want you to read Genesis chapter 47, verses 23 through 26. When Joseph made an investment by purchasing land with grain, what was the long-term financial payout of that deal? And were the people upset with Pharaoh for being wise with his finances? And how did the people benefit from Joseph and Pharaoh's wisdom? What I want you to see in these passages is that Pharaoh saved a fifth of his harvest for 7 years, which bought him all the land. And now the long-term financial payoff was that he received a fifth of everyone else's harvest for the rest of his life. That was a huge asset that not only made him the wealthiest, but also made him the all-powerful Pharaoh in Egypt. And here's one of the things I want you to notice. Understand that it wasn't evil for him to be wise with his finances and to buy all the land. In fact, he actually saved the lives of those people, and they were thankful for Pharaoh and for Joseph being wise with their finances. Otherwise, everyone would have been dead. And so this benefited everybody. What are some practical ways that you can limit liabilities to invest in assets later? What are some examples of potential assets you might invest in over the next few years? And how could we serve God more if we had some assets instead of only liabilities in our life? Next, I want you to close in prayer and ask God to help us see our spiritual and financial possibilities. Pray for God to help us with the 90-day tithing challenge. And remember to invest in assets and limit liabilities with every aspect of our lives. Thank you. This is the rest of your small group. We'll see you on Sunday.